Hi, everyone. I'm Jasmine Hoffman, the head of experience at Tech United, here to introduce a brand new series that we are launching called What I Learned from Women. There's no better time to launch this series than in March for Women's History Month. And to kick off today's first ever episode about sales and sales execution, we have our lovely guest, Deborah Leff. Good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
I'm so happy to be here, Jasmine. Thank you. And thank Tech United for inviting me.
Of course, we're so happy to have you. Well, we have a ton to cover today, and I want to get into the incredible depths of your knowledge. So before we get into some of your amazing tips on sales, sales execution, interviewing, and all that good stuff, can you tell our audience a little bit more about yourself?
Certainly. I actually started my career in marketing, never intended to be a salesperson or go into sales in any way, shape, or form. But sometimes careers have a way of folding in a way that just bring you on a journey, even if it's not what you set out to do. And I'm so glad it took me in that direction because it really can be such a rewarding and fulfilling profession. And I'm so glad that it found me. I've been in sales for well over 20 years, everything from an individual contributor to a first line manager to a VP of sales, ultimately was the global head of sales for business analytics for IBM.
Wow, that's incredible. And I know you have an amazing background and you've worked in so many different industries and had some truly incredible wins throughout your career. So I want to translate some of those into how you work with sales teams currently and how you approach specifically startups.
Perfectly, sure. So I actually have a startup background. So my very first sales job was going to work for a company where I had bought their product. And so that was kind of that transition from marketing when I never thought, it wasn't even a thought in my head to go into sales. I had actually bought a product that I loved. It was life-changing. And when the CEO was in my office one day and suggested he needed a salesperson in New York, it initially just like flew over my head because I wasn't a salesperson. But then I got to thinking, wow, I can actually buy this product and go bring it to all of the people in my job role, in my industry, and like use that to almost figure out where I wanted to go next. And honestly, it just took like a nanosecond to decide I absolutely love selling, and then kind of grew my career from there. But because I come from a startup background, I think just the nature of my journey was very much to focus on sales and sales execution. So I've always stayed somewhat connected to the entrepreneurial community, and have just learned so much over time on how to really shorten the learning curve so that you're not making mistakes and delaying your time to revenue, which for a startup can be extremely important.
Beyond important, it can make or break a company, right? I think it's something like, 80% of startups fail. Don't quote me on that, but it's a large percentage that don't make it, right? Like it's very tough, and revenue is a critical part. You've talked to me a little bit in the past before about founders selling and where they go wrong and where they can go right.
So for the last year and a half since I left IBM and actually been spending most of my time doing more consulting with startups and involved with private equity. And I would say the most common thing that I see is that some founders, because some founders are really born salesmen, even though they don't think of themselves that way, but right. Can be almost like this enigma. Like I don't feel comfortable in the world of selling. It's a profession. I'm not a professional salesperson. And the go-to can be, I need to hire a VP of sales who knows what they're doing so that we can start getting that revenue flowing. And I usually push back and I help them think that through, because a VP of sales is a very expensive hire, and often the revenue does not flow directly through their hands. So the first thing that I tell them is, you have to always maintain, this is your company. No one is going to have the passion, the drive, the love of this product like you are. So don't worry about not being a salesman. You are probably the best person to sell the product. And more importantly, you are going to learn so much from the direct experience of asking a question or of a prospect about what they're going through, hearing their responses, having them ask you questions about your solution, which is going to help you formulate very important elements of even the solution or how you go about your go-to-market strategy. And the learnings that you're going to get from just that firsthand representation are really important. So I just say, don't worry about not being a salesperson. you've already been explaining your solution to friends, to families, to investors. You are a great person to explain it to your audience as well, the people that will be buying it. And that experience is going to help you with then that first hire, which really, really should be a superstar salesperson.
Before we talk about how you find that superstar salesperson, there's one thing you just touched on that I want to elaborate. This notion of a salesperson. I'm not a seller. I'm like seeing salespeople or people that are in sales is like this sort of other. How do you get founders to get past that mentally? And is it just mentally by you explaining to them like no one's more passionate than you? Or is there sort of this other lever they can pull to get into this mindset and be successful?
I think it is this emotional hurdle, like you described, that it's like, oh gosh, I'm so afraid. I'm so afraid of doing it. A lot of times they're afraid of lead generation. I wouldn't know. I do not think a founder should cold call. And I think a lot of times when people think that I have to be a seller, they're thinking, oh my gosh, I have to start cold calling people. That's not at all what I mean. We can use marketing resources, internal or external. There are amazing agencies out there that can help with early lead gen. There is the thought leadership of using a marketing agency to help you get noticed, to write about what you're doing that's new and unique so that people come to you to learn more. But when you have someone interested, getting in front of a customer is not all that different than going in front of a board of directors or an investor or, people that have helped you get to that point. And I think that it's just breaking down so that they feel more comfortable taking that leap and not paralyzed by the things they wouldn't even know how to start doing. Cold calling, absolutely a sales skill. Not everyone's going to do that naturally, but that's not what I mean when I say you should feel confident that you are actually the best person to get out to a customer and start speaking with them.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, the founder created their company because they wanted to solve a problem. So all they can do is speak to other people's problems and how hopefully what they've built is the best way to solve it.
And usually, this is their baby. They're so so knowledgeable. All of that comes across. Passion is the most persuasive, arsenal in a salesperson's basket. Like naturally have it. So it's just that confidence. And now it's also the presentation materials they're using. They don't know the first thing about that, but all of these things are very easy to hire a coach, a consultant, somebody like me that's going to help them design those materials or just be a sounding board to help them get ready. And then they're going to see they're going to be way more successful at it than they think that they otherwise could be.
For sure. So now let's dig into that hire, that superstar salesperson.
Yeah. So now the time to bring on a salesperson is actually when you feel ready to teach a seller how to sell something. The most important thing about sales skills is that there are the skills of selling, how to present, how to negotiate, how to prospect, that are very generic in nature, right? If you just even Google sales training, there's going to be hundreds of that, millions and millions of hits. Millions of hits. There's books and there's training resources, and they're amazing resources written by just brilliant people that have incredible experience. But the nature of that training is it's very generic. And the best training is when you take the generic skills and you marry them with the specifics of how to prospect this solution, how to present this solution, how to handle objections about this solution, how to compete against our competitors. And when you hire a salesperson, know that it's not just add water. We don't just hire a salesperson and say, go off and do your salesy things and it will rain revenue. That's not what happens. We need to teach sellers how to be successful, which means taking the generic and mapping it to the specific things we need. It's almost like we're giving them a paint by number so that they can be an artist with your solution. So when you are looking for a superstar salesperson, the first thing we need is for that person to drive revenue. And having someone who has exceptional skills, who then could work with that founder in a doesn't have to be formalized training, but verbally, the ability to really communicate, right? My very first sales job, I went to work for the CEO of the product that I bought. My sales training consisted of me going to his house because his first floor was converted into an office and sitting with him side by side, Deborah, when I call people and I talk about our solution, this is what I say. When they want to see it, this is how I show it to them. And I just sat there like writing everything down. Now I would just record the conversation, but it was before iPhones existed. So, but that ability to impart that knowledge is going to be key to that person's success.
Absolutely. And that really builds on this foundation of the founders feeling empowered to be able to discuss and convince people that their product is the right solution for them. For sellers, and I want to talk about this in a second. I know we're going to talk about interviewing, but how do you advise folks on objections? Objections is a massive part of handling a sales call or handling a negotiation or a deal, whatever you want to call it. How do you advise founders to train their sellers on that?
How would I advise people train on that? That's like full stop. It doesn't have to be a founder. It could be an experienced sales organization, could be a company as big as an IBM or as small as a 3-person startup. The best advice for objection handling I can give you is don't answer that too quickly. When a customer asks a question about a feature, a product, it usually comes from a place deeper. And sellers sometimes rush to answer that question. I'm looking at, another product that does this. Can you do that as well? Don't answer that question. Why is that important to you? Use their objection as a way to really understand what is driving that question. That is a very, very important skill, because sometimes the surface level question that someone's asking you, which seems like, objection handling, I hear an objection. Sometimes we jump to answer that without actually knowing what was behind it. And they could be asking something that's actually not relevant to their success. They just don't know it because a competitor planted a landmine. So my best advice on that is don't rush to answer. Always answer an objection with a question that allows you to have a deeper discussion so you understand where is that coming from.
Would you say that this ultimately stems into listening and how critical listening is?
We're over in the generic sales column, obvious. I mean, listening skills are really important, but I would say more important than listening skills is the ability to really understand what it is you're listening to. And so like generic sales training will be, there are mechanisms on active listening or how you repeat a question to confirm what you heard, the way in which you should, there are methods that have acronyms on what makes good questioning methodologies. I've studied all of these things. I've used many of them in my own sales experience. But really what I found is what really separates someone who's an exceptional seller is the way they use questions to really understand what is happening for the prospect, to really get in their head and make sure they understand the full landscape in front of them so that when they're responding, it's actually very, very valuable. And then they become a resource to the person that they're speaking with. But yes, 2 ears and 1 mouth is a rule of thumb. A seller should be listening twice as much as they're speaking, because showing up and making a presentation and telling is not selling. And there's a lot of things that have to happen in a complex sale that you miss out if you spend too much time talking to the prospect and not enough time asking questions and really listening to the responses, which, by the way, this kind of leads me to something, right? So I always say you have to hire a superstar salesperson. And then the obvious next question is, well, how do I know I'm hiring a superstar? So if a founder or a young entrepreneurial organization doesn't have experience hiring a salesperson, a lot of times the go-to is to work their network. I need a good salesperson, and names will be given to them or referred to them. So as a entrepreneur, how do you know that you're interviewing someone who has good sales skills? Because at the end of the day, a salesman should be pretty good at selling themselves. And so the difference between hiring someone who is a superstar versus not could be 2x the revenue. I mean, it's a huge risk and gamble. You want to get this right. And so a lot of the work I've done in the past year and a half has actually been interviewing on behalf of some of the startups that I work with, or even teaching them interview skills. And the first thing, this goes back to your question on listening, Jasmine. The first thing, so I'll say there's probably three things I suggest that they try and accomplish in the interview. The first thing they should accomplish is ask them a question, a very open-ended question. Tell me about your background. Tell me about your sales experience. And then hit the mute button. If it's on Zoom, don't hit mute because they'll see you're muted, but then pretend you're muted. And the reason why I say mute yourself is because you want to experience what is your prospect going to experience in talking to this person. Is this person going to launch into a monologue where I feel like bored and tired and I can't get a word in edgewise, or are they engaging me? So if you ask an open-ended question, just see how long they answer it without verbal cues. So you have to work hard to not do the which encourages someone to talk longer. So no verbal cues, ask an open question, and then try and put yourself in the shoes of the prospect that they would be talking to and see how they do engaging you. That's the first gate. How well do they engage you? The second, and this doesn't come naturally if you've never been in sales, you have to ask them about their sales skills, which cannot be a direct question. So the indirect questions that I often use and teach others to use is, tell me about the last sales book that you read. Tell me about your favorite sales training. Why did you enjoy it? What's your favorite sales methodology? The answers to these questions are going to be very indicative on how serious is this person you are speaking to in advancing their own skills as a seller. No question. Sellers are born with a natural talent, but it's how you hone that talent that separates a seller from a superstar. I was in an interview not that long ago, Jasmine, I kid you not. I asked them, tell me about the best sales training. And the answer was, I've never had sales training. Okay. Have you read a sales book? No. So tell me, what makes you good at what you do? Well, I'm very good at making the prospect my friend. And then they really open up to me and I can get that sales sold. That is not an indication of superstar skills. Absolutely not. You want someone who's honed their own skills.
And who is hungry for it, right? You want someone who can not only stand up and say, these are my metrics, these are the big brands I've closed, these are the processes that I've put in place, but you also want someone who is dedicated to continuing to educate themselves and not just sort of be comfortable sitting on their kind of natural ability to talk and like be friendly.
Exactly. And by the way, if you really think of yourself as a sales professional and you want to be good at your job, you want to be keep reading what's the latest thoughts,
right.
ideas, now that there's AI in the mix. I mean, there's so much new stuff
for sure
in the past, even just year, that have been fascinating. So that's a great question to just at least assess the level. And then the third thing that I advise on is you need to assess to see if they're going to be successful in your environment.
Right.
And I say your environment because by nature, a startup means you need someone who's a self-starter, going to work very, very well independently, and is going to be resourceful on their own to get what they need to get the sales done. If you are talking to people that have come from a very large organization, there might be all these materials created for them and spoon-fed to them. Here's a presentation, here's a letter, here's a proposal, all written for you. They could have had a sales engineer that did all of their demos. Heck, they could have been part of a larger team and actually had almost nothing to do with the success of a sale, but yet they get to claim that track record. So you want to look for like experience, someone who has worked in a small organization, in a startup culture before, so that you feel confident they're going to be successful with you.
That makes a lot of sense. Are there folks that you've interviewed before that have come from a larger organization, but a type that has had sort of a startup mentality or had smaller teams where they're able to have a similar type of experience and showcase similar drive? Or is it typically the people that come from startup background are the ones that stay in a startup background?
Absolutely. Oh, that, by the way, Jasmine, I'm so thrilled that you asked that question. I came from the world. IBM was the first large company that I have ever worked for. And I have to tell you, in each of my roles within IBM, it was almost like I figured out how to carve a little entrepreneurial path for myself that I was able to deliver the performance that I wanted to deliver, which of course was, far outside what they expected of me, but that's just me. In that environment, there are plenty of companies that might be launching a new product and that team acts like a startup, or they made an acquisition and that acquired company acts like a startup. So you're looking for relevant experience that's an indication to you that they have what they need, but that does not mean by any measure that you should just exclude people that have only worked for big companies. But that's a great question to ask in the interview process so that you can come to that conclusion on your own.
Absolutely. So now once you hire this superstar and you're starting to grow your revenue, what are the next couple of hires that you typically recommend? How do you advise companies build out their revenue team?
So while the founders, the kind of knee-jerk reaction might be, okay, our product is almost at a point where we're ready to go to market, I must hire a VP of sales. My answer to that is, hang on, we want the revenue rolling. So the very, very, very first thing you need to do is, one, get it started on your own and then bring in a superstar. The next investment after that is I would bring in a inside sales rep, sometimes known as a BDR, so that you can pair your outside seller with an inside seller, because that is going to help you double down on that investment and yield a lot more revenue. Third hire, might want to bring in another superstar salesperson. At the moment in time where you feel as the founder or the executive that you are just stretched too thin, that you just cannot manage all of these people, that is going to be your time to hire a sales leader. By the way, that might be one of your early sellers. They may have the skills to bump up and grow with you in the organization, as I did in the first company that I worked for. Or you may want to hire in an experienced manager who has a complete different set of skill sets. But the one most important thing to keep in mind is that a sales leader is not additive to revenue. They're managing the revenue that your sellers are bringing in. So if you take your superstar salesperson who's bringing in the revenue for you and you promote them, now you're asking them to divert their attention to managerial activities that now limits the amount of time they're spending selling. And so promoting someone from within means that you are ready to take that revenue hit in order to accelerate your scale and grow faster. But please make that choice knowingly. So I say the sales team should be managed by the founder until such a point that they're just crying. I can't do it anymore. That's going to be your time to go, okay, now it's worth the investment to bring in a manager or a sales leader.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know we have just a few minutes left of your time, so I want to quickly touch on something you mentioned earlier, which is sales training. Hopefully you're bringing in sellers that have gone through their own training and have a strong background and are eager to learn. How do you further support their education and their training once they're a part of the team?
Yeah. So especially for a startup organization, how quickly you can ramp a new seller is critical for two reasons. One, not every hire you're going to make is going to be the right hire. So you're going to have to figure out, did we make a mistake, or was this person really a good fit for us? If you are not taking sales training to the point where you're teaching them very specifically, this is what works, this is how to sell this product to our target market, means you are leaving it to someone else's trial and error to figure it out. And that can be very time consuming. I think average ramp time for enterprise seller is 9 months. So if it takes 9 months to ramp to revenue, that means one, you need a lot of patience to figure it out. And two, you don't want to figure out if they're the right hire after 9 months. You don't want to be a year or a year in, because the opportunity cost on that could be devastating for a startup organization. Instead, you want to make sure that each new sales hire you bring on, you are going to be in a position to really very specifically teach them what works. This is what the sales process looks like. And by the way, if you hear that and that's really scary, don't worry. There are plenty of people, there are consultants out there, there are people to help you through this. It's going to come from your existing sales. Let's just go into a conference room for a day or two and just take a look at all of your best wins. How long did it take? What was the sales process? What did we need to support it? What prospecting materials were useful? How did we attract the lead? How did we develop the opportunity? Who were the stakeholders on their side of the table? By documenting and examining all of that, you can create what I call last mile sales materials that don't just teach you how to sell, but teach you how to sell this product to our target market, shortens ramp time dramatically, and make sure that everyone you bring on has what they need to be successful as quickly as possible. Literally, one of the most important investments you could make as a young startup organization is making sure you are doing that so that everyone you bring on has what they need to be successful.
Absolutely. And I know that ultimately, if you're just starting out, this is a super daunting task. And so the feedback you shared across all these different categories has been super helpful here. I want to end with, if you have one chance to talk to a founder as they're just starting out, their product launched yesterday, what is the number one piece of advice that you would be giving them?
Oh gosh, I would be more a question. How can I help? What are you struggling with? What help do you need? So I think that there isn't one thing in all of the conversations I have with different founders launching different products. They tend to get stuck in different areas. And I think that's one of the benefits of, I'm sure you see that across the incubator. Like that's one of, everyone kind of struggles at different points in time. And so that's a really hard, blanket. But I will say that you can have the best product, you can have the best marketing, but if you don't have a sales engine that can really do the job you need them to do, you don't have the revenue, and you cannot convert that into the company you want to have. And so the care and the intention into really recognizing that how you hire, how you recruit, how you compensate, how you train your sales organization, that's the last mile between everything you have done up until that point and your success. Treat it that way and you'll be a lot more successful.
Awesome. I love it. And you exemplified your own advice, which is ask a question before getting a potential answer that you might not be ready for. So that was perfect. You just reverse that right on me. So yeah, every startup has their own challenges. It's important to listen. And I think a lot of them get so overwhelmed. It's important to take a step back and really look at what you've done, analyze those past wins, take a real hard look at what you need to grow, and you can implement that yourself and then empower other leaders in your organization that you either hire or already have to do it for you. So all around excellent feedback. Thank you so much for joining us today. I have your LinkedIn scrolling across the bottom if anybody wants to get in touch with you. Is this the best place to reach you?
Yeah, absolutely. Just awesome. Connect, reach out, DM, and I'll be more than happy to speak to anybody.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And in Tech United, we like to end on a high five. So we are going to high five on the count of 3. Are you ready?
Yep.
1, 2, 3. Boom. I will see you soon. Thank you so much.